I've gotten younger and let my hair grow and grew a lot.
Oh,
Old age is
luckily,
looking right up for
the
me.
whole moderate income housing plan that most cities have to have,
So,
because of pushback, they're like, okay, a certain class of city doesn't have it. So that's where we usually get that win, but some of them we don't. But it's only because we have to be active with the league and have the league recognize the difference between rural
like,
and urban, because they spend most of their time in that mindset too. And the people they interact with the most are the Sandy cities and the Saratoga Springs and the Eagle Mountains, and you know.
no, not
Since you come
fully.
from Park City, this shouldn't scare you.
No, no, and I grew up in Chicago, so I mean, cold
They
and
have more
weather.
wind than Parowan?
Yeah.
Oh.
But yes, no, I am, but I'm not. People think we had a little bit of a warm fall, but how are you doing?
Try to be,
Good.
but I do go to.
Not really. I don't like the getting dark so early. That's where I struggle more.
There. I don't know if there's a reason to think that the gentleman.
Well, David, good to see you.
He can't be here. He does want to be here to watch the conversation. And he's like, is there a way I can move? I was like, well, I was going to try to move it first.
Oh, it's
The other thing I'm going to make you aware of so he doesn't catch this cold, and I'm going to go talk to him. But they are a couple that want to go
Test, 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 test. Can you hear me?
Correct agenda, are we not having a public
it
hearing?
right.
Yeah, I mean,
So I'm going to go.
How are you?
What were we having?
Miss Jamie, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Hey, you don't have to stay, Harry.
Well,
You do need.
no.
I didn't get to 5 o'clock.
yeah, yeah, so I
Where are we?
investigated this.
Well, that's
complete all the way to the sewer. Is it complete? Probably not enough piping.
I was actually a half hour early.
I mean, they're gonna have to, under our present code, they're gonna have to bring
What's that?
very quiet to the plant.
and they already have 400.
You always go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I hear you.
I hate,
No,
yeah, there's some things they don't have to do, but they're.
Thank you.
Whether
Oh, I'm on?
it's tested or not. Is their application complete? So, yeah.
Zero, that's a lot.
Okay, I'm gonna jump in.
100% increase? No, I think 60 is.
Good evening, everybody. We're calling to order this meeting of the Parowan City Planning and Zoning Commission for November 6, 2024. It is 6:40 p.m., we'll call it. I apologize for us being a little disorganized and late. We had a little bit of training to go through, so please be patient. All right, our first item, are there any declarations of conflict of interest for any of the items on the agenda from any of the members?
No.
And no, that's all no's. Thank you. Next item, approval of the minutes from the meeting on October 2nd. Does anybody have any comments or changes to the minutes? So I have a couple really minor ones. I apologize for not just getting these out to you, Callie, sooner rather than now. But on the first thing, we're numbered page 1 of 2, 2 of 2, and 3 of 2. I wonder if we get the pagination straightened out so we know we've got 3 pages and if we're ever looking back. And then on page 1, I think the artificial intelligence, to me, numbered the first sentence and the second sentence in number 5 is misleading. I think my recommendation would be to move the word following and everything after that to the period up in front of the committee, because the way I read it, it looks like we have a pending action. Number 5 on page 1. There we go. So if we read that second sentence, the committee deemed it ready for a positive recommendation to be presented to the city council, and it has a comma, following an internal review process focused on community and legislative implications. When I read that casually, it looked to me like, wow, we didn't finish it, we made it contingent on something. No, I thought if we just moved, starting with the word following, and all the way through the rest of that sentence, and moved it up in front of the word in front of the, and put the comma. Yeah, right there. And take the period out and make it a comma, I think would be good. Is my recommended change. Any other changes, suggestions? All right, I would entertain a motion regarding the minutes.
Go ahead. I make a motion that we approve the minutes from October 2nd, or actually, what's the date of that?
Yeah.
It's the 2nd, October 2nd, 2024, with the approved changes.
Good minutes, Callie.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. Our next item is an application for a home occupation business license at 40 North, 300 West. And I'm probably going to get this name wrong. Vianili Alvarez. Is that close?
Vianna Lee.
V, okay, thank you. That helps. No, please come up to the microphone.
So if I could, Larry, these home occupation permits, business licenses are typically administratively approved if there are no protests, and if there's nothing that the administrative staff determines could be an issue. And in this case, we did have two protests from nearby neighbors, which our code means it automatically comes to Planning Commission for the conditional use permit, because that's essentially what it is. It's not essentially, it is what it is. It's a conditional use permit to operate a business within a residential zone. The one protest just said no. There was no other details given. One of the other protests said, and I don't know if you have it up, Callie, but it was concerned about the traffic in the neighborhood due to the business. And I believe Ms. Alvarez is ready to talk to that, and of course address any other questions that the Planning Commission has. But that's why we're here.
Thank you. So I reviewed this application, and so just to add a little bit more from where city manager left off, I see that there's one in the package that, well, first off, there was 3 yeses, there was 2 neutrals, which means they didn't answer yes or no, and then there was 2 that were opposed in some way. And the 2 for opposition, one just said, no, not zoned for commercial use, would cause too much traffic in a residential area. So I would just say there's a concern about traffic. And then there's one that says, do not want. And just make sure. And then just to share the good side of things, not focus on the bad, there's one that says approved. Another one says no problem, good luck with your new business. We have another that says good luck with this. I think that's where it ends. There were a total of 15 notices sent out for this, and those were the responses. I remind you there were 2 that didn't reply either way. Very well. If you'd like to tell us about your enterprise, that'd be great.
Yeah, my plan is called Mexican Homestead Pantry, and basically is pre-order the healthy Mexican meals. I have a daughter that's a cancer survivor, and ever since then I just looked into healthy food and all this stuff, and I have a lot of friends that have tried my food, and every time they would go, they're like, you need to sell this, and that's how I started. I was like, the idea came out, and when I posted on Facebook, everybody was, yes, let's do this, there were really great comments, and then this happened, so then we have to wait, and I have, for the traffic, it's a valid route, which is why they're also pre-ordered, and in my website, which is still in the not stay there and sit and eat, I cook the meals the same day, I sell it the same day, I cannot save food for that day, so it's not going to be it's not like somebody else can be like, oh, I'll come back tomorrow and pick up something else. I can't do that, so I will be able to manage traffic like that. Nobody's going to be able to go to my house if I do not know that they're coming to my house for, ordering food or whatever, something like that. And yeah, that's the only thing that I had in mind, that I was like, okay, I do have something planned for that, for the people that are worried about traffic. And I
Okay.
have questions, so if that answered it.
All right. One of the questions I have is, how are you addressing parking?
My driveway. So in my driveway, there's 3-4 cars up to, but like I said, there's only going to be 2 people at the most. That's my plan for pickup, and they won't be staying longer than 5 minutes there, because the food will be ready to pick up. And so, yeah, and my husband works in the evening, and I just have 1 car, and so I can park ahead closer to the garage, and then there's 2 parking spaces still available behind my car.
And are you viewing these as what I'm hearing, these sound like relatively short stays for pickup?
Oh, yeah, just
So-
like, your food is ready, they'll be able to get a text or a call, come in, pick it up, and leave the house. They're not gonna be sitting around or waiting for the food to be ready or anything like that.
Okay. Anything else you wanna,
If you guys, if you guys have
any
questions.
questions from the commission?
So, it'll be scheduled then for when they come to pick up the food?
Yes, so when they place the order, I would ask them, it's only gonna be Sunday, Monday, and Tuesdays that I'll be doing this. It won't be all week. And then they will have to pre-order, anywhere from 2 weeks to a week in advance, so that I can, because I don't wanna have a lot of leftovers and stuff, so I wanna be able to manage that. And this is more for me to be able to provide the healthy food that people like, that I cook, and so, and something for me to do as a stay-at-home mom, so.
Okay.
And I did get my kitchen inspected, so I have the house permit already. I got my manager's food training. I did get my food handler, so I got my sales tax already. I registered my business. I did everything right because I want to do an actual business. I don't want to just get people out and, I'm being careful. I'm a former nurse too, so I do care
Wow.
about people's health.
So in reviewing the package, I looked at that and
Thorough.
it looks like the documentation that was collected by the city office is more than adequate for all the health stuff and certifications and so on. Business license, tax number, and those sorts of things. And just to put us back, if I can find it here, just into space so that we're actually doing this objectively and have evidence that we are working through this. I'm gonna walk us through the conditions and requirements that are in the home occupation code. So there's about a dozen of those. Now these were all already certified as yes by the applicant because they're also on the city application. But I just, in case this triggers anything for anybody, I'll walk through these. I may not give them to you word for word, so if you have a question about what I'm asking, speak up. Okay, so first thing it says, each and every one of the following conditions have to be observed by the holder of the permit. First item, the home occupation will be conducted only by members of the family residing on the premises. That's good. Next item, the home occupation will be conducted wholly within the structure on the premises and shall not exceed 25% of the total ground floor area of the home. And the home occupation will not occupy any area within structures which are required for off-street parking. Meaning they're not gonna park in your garage, presumably. Item C, inventory and supplies for the home occupation shall not occupy more than 50% of the permitted area and 12% of the ground floor area of the home. You don't have to answer all these. If anybody on the commission has a question about one of these, just please speak up. No business signs are used with the exception of one unhighlighted sign concerned with the home occupation or office of the professional person not to exceed 1 square foot, attached to and parallel to the building. So it's a very small sign attached to the building. No display of any kind shall be visible from the exterior of the premises. The home occupation shall not generate pedestrian or commercial traffic in excess of that customarily associated with the zone in which the use is located. Off-street parking shall not exceed that specified for residential lots as noted in our code 15.52. Based on what I've heard so far, that's not a problem. There shall be, excuse me, there shall be complete conformity with fire, plumbing, building, electrical, and health codes and to all state and city laws and ordinances. A home occupation shall not cause a demand for municipal or utility services or community facilities in excess of those usually and customarily provided for residential uses. A home occupation shall not alter the residential character of the premises or unreasonably disturb the peace and quiet, and so on, including lighting, noises, sounds, vibrations, dust, odors, and fumes. And any special condition established by the Planning Commission be made a record in the home occupation permit. So if we want to put anything special in there, this is our opportunity. If we need to mitigate something that we suspect is a hazard or a challenge. Then we get on, we don't care about, we care about that one. We're not worried about it tonight. Here's a clause for violations and so on. Retail sales on the premises shall be limited to merchandise directly related to the services offered by the home occupation. Otherwise, no delivery or resale to customers of retail merchandise on the premises. And the Planning Commission can inspect the premises after reasonable notice given due cause, if we like. And that's it. Any challenges with any of that? Any questions from anybody on the commission?
The only question or thought that I had when you were talking about traffic was, if there were going to be like Nicholas or Cisco deliveries, like I could see neighbors being irritated with one of the, semis backing up and delivering and on a regular basis.
No. If I ever get that big, I will own a restaurant or something. Future plans. No, this is just,
'Kay.
home. I just want to do something else, something separate. Sorry. Yeah.
Other questions, concerns?
Nope.
No.
Well, I would entertain a motion regarding this home occupation request.
I make a motion that we approve the application for a home occupation business license at the location of 40 North, 300 West.
Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition. The ayes have it. Thank you all.
I want some of your food.
I did make them, but I didn't bring them.
Dang.
I haven't eaten all day. I won't park in the driveway either.
I have beef tostadas at home right now, so.
We
You
wanted
can go
samples.
home. I'm sorry.
We wanted samples.
Okay, next time.
No, kidding.
I'm making tamales actually for myself, so I'll bring you guys all tamales.
All right. Thank you very
Well,
much.
thank you so much.
Congratulations.
I appreciate your time.
Good
Thank
luck.
you.
Thanks for nothing.
Next item on our agenda is the AJM application. We're going to talk about density and zoning we're going to shoot for a density and zoning recommendation maybe tonight. Callie, this is not fair to ask you right now, but do you happen to have the map? Thank you.
I know. It's this one, right, we're going off of now?
Yes. Proposal number 2.
I guess we'll start with one. So, Dallas Buckner, Go Civil Engineering. This is the first map that we put together and had quite a lengthy discussion last time on. We got some feedback toward the end of the meeting, so this was the original version we had provided, and then Callie has the second version. Some of the feedback that we got was looking at the purple coloring that is representative of the higher density. We moved that down to be across from the park, and then we looked at moving that yellow to be not as close to the west side. We put it off of 200 North. so this is the revised version based on some of the feedback that was provided. Um, and this map is more or less the same as far as the notes go. We kind of changed some of the numbering on the pods, and so those notes had to be updated to reflect those, but the substance of those notes on the right side is still the same. The density calculations remains relatively similar. I had to shift them around a little bit as the acreages changed to still hit that, and I think I ended up with one more unit. I think I was 556 on this one instead of 555 on the original. But we more or less, as we move those colors around, tried to keep the same acreages. I think some of the feedback we also got on the yellow, which is the medium density or the twin home duplex density, was that we'd want to see potentially more of that. And so I think we increased that in size from, I think, 16 to 22 acres, or 17 to 22. So again, I think we were trying to get a recommendation to go to council to talk about how the planning commission felt about version 1, version 2, or what aspects you did or didn't like between the two, or I don't know, this is kind of an unconventional way that we're doing this, or different from other annexations I've done. So yeah, that's kind of, those were kind of the major changes outside of just cleaning up some notes and stuff. But that's kind of based on what was discussed last meeting. This is our interpretation of incorporating some of those changes. So.
Thank you. All right, now's your chance. Questions? So I'll open the discussion. So I have a sheet and I've basically gone through really all the notes on this document that's on our screen now. And so these are not decisions, they're really discussion points or things.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the intent for me to put those notes on there was that as we go through an annexation agreement, which we discussed last time is very similar to a development agreement, but these were the things in my mind that stood out that were worth noting. But as we work through with council and planning commission, there could be additional ones, but those were the ones I felt were important to have on there, at least for the discussion.
So are we agreed in general that there'll be an annexation/development agreement?
So in my mind, in proposing the zoning, I'm thinking that there is an annexation agreement. And typically there's an annexation agreement, I think, with every annexation. Maybe Dan?
I believe our code actually requires it.
Yeah, and so I think the difference is some annexation agreements just come through and it's a little tiny parcel and there's not much more than just says, hey, you're bringing the water, or you're...
Right.
But in this one, I'm looking at this as more of, we're proposing this map to come in with the annexation, with the intent of hopefully getting some version of this zoning approved. And so this, in my mind, is a longer annexation agreement than a simpler, smaller parcel.
And Dan, are you looking at that, going that comprises the entire annexation agreement? And then you're going to do a development agreement, or are you looking at this as being the document?
We had been anticipating doing a so if you look at state code, it doesn't mention annexation agreements. It does mention development agreements, and one of the reasons you can use them is for annexation.
Right.
So the thought was that we would want to do a development agreement on the front end of being something that we would say we would annex it, yes or no, based on if we could come to terms on a development agreement. Okay. And it would be just a component of our annexation agreement.
And I'm good with that. I'm just trying to understand if where we're gonna end up with that as we go down the road. And it depends on how I address it. So part of the challenge for a development agreement is we have to have some triggers. If a developer's not agreeing to do a development agreement, one can still be required, and then based on requesting exceptions to our code. And so there's a couple things in these notes that are requesting things that are, I don't wanna say contrary, but are not supported by our code. Just a couple.
But we have to remember, and I know I say this too often, we have to remember our lanes and the ultimate decision is the city council, the mayor and the council. So we're on today for density and zoning, right? Am I wrong?
And that's what this is all about.
But we're not approving an annexation plan, we're not approving a land use development plan.
I'm not trying to approve anything, if
No,
you're
no,
there
but
with
you're
us,
talking
we'll get
about,
to
you
the
know,
point.
just wanna make sure on the end part, we can't prejudge or pre-comment on what will be the ultimate outcome here. And say, you know, I know I'm looking down the road, but I wanna, we can only do what we do here. We can't try and bind the city council or the mayor, or try and manipulate the developer in a way that, I mean, we gotta stick with zoning and density, period.
Yeah, and I understand that. And
Okay.
as we move through these notes, I mean, you've probably looked at them, they are regarding density and zoning.
Okay.
And I'm trying to figure out if this is the entire agreement, or if there's gonna be more agreement. Because we may end up with a recommendation that says, we support all these except number 10, and here's what we recommend the city council do to move forward. They don't have to do that, we're not binding them, we're not binding anybody.
Right, but if he makes a presentation on zoning and density, and I know this is hard to swallow, what the city council and the mayor ultimately decide may be wholly different. They may,
Well, that's
they're
fine,
not bound by the recommendation of the planning commission.
we understand that,
Okay, that's all.
clearly.
Huh?
You hammered it home last meeting, I still
I
understand
know, we go through
it.
this every time, and it's like, what I thought I heard you saying is, I wanna have an agreement in place, and I wanna make
No,
sure.
you didn't hear me say that.
Okay,
I just asked if there was gonna be one or not.
okay, all right.
So my thought in providing those notes was more of a jump-off point for whether it's a development agreement that's part of the annexation or whatever, but these are the notes I'm putting forward. I'm assuming the city is gonna have notes that also get compiled into whatever that master agreement is, whether that's annexation agreement with an appendix that's the development agreement is one, or however we work it out, but
Right, and yes, based on
Okay.
what Dan says and what you're saying, I understand.
And I now know, while you guys were having that exchange, which I think was helpful, to keep everybody kind of, aware of everybody's, perspective, it is in our annexation policy plan that says that we require an annexation agreement. It isn't in our code, and it's not in state code. It says an annexation agreement will be prepared between the city and future developers, outlining specific circumstances relating to water, sewer, streets, electricity, telecommunications, fiber, broadband, and other specific improvements.
Yeah, so we're all on the same page, that's cool. All right, the first, comment that I have is just a general note. And I actually took this at face value, and I think the chart says there's 166.04 acres. And when I look at the county webpage, it seems like it gives, for AJM, 162.73.
so my acreage is based on my survey that I did of the property.
Okay, so I'm not sure what that implies.
So a lot of
So-
time with real estate, if you go to the county, they might be off on acreage, and we have to get a survey done, and then if you submit that survey to the county, they'll actually adjust it. So they like to go off the surveys more than the county.
So, yeah, so what that implies is that the county GIS is accurate maybe 50% of the time. And so especially when it's related to acreage, and so a lot of times, especially for a property like this that was deeded and hasn't been subdivided many times, it's based on a standard section versus what the section's actually surveyed as. And so depending on what it's actually surveyed as, it can grow or shrink based on those monuments. And so that's where the record description probably had the 162, but then when we actually surveyed it for the annexation, and the 166 matches the annexation map that will be filed with the state and change municipal
Okay,
boundaries.
so it'll end up at 166.
Yes, yep,
Okay.
correct.
Cool. I thought maybe we were manufacturing property somehow. Well, that was a good trick. Thank you. Note 1, I don't have any comments. Note 2 could be regarded as a code exception. Let me just see here. So the number of, the density being proposed by the developer, 556 units, that is achievable with the alternate zoning proposed. And when I say alternate, I'm just say straight out, so our flume, indicates that all this property should be low-density residential. So as this proposal comes in, what we really need to wrestle with as a planning commission for a recommendation is how do we want to disposition our flume. So we have state and, well, who knows else, even national needs for low-income affordable housing. So you can get that if we can have R2 and R3 planned unit developments and so on. But our code doesn't our flume for this particular parcel does not support that. So when we make a decision, we have to decide, are we going to go, well, we're not required to follow the flume, and we think maybe we need this type of housing more rather than less, and we can move off in that direction. But as we do that, we are increasing the density on that property over and above the flume. And we want it on the record why that was done, so in the future somebody doesn't look at it when we're all not here and go, how did we ever reach that decision? And that would be in the development agreement.
So I have a slightly different perspective on that. I'm looking at it I'm saying that the property from the flume has a total density of so depending on how you do the math, if you do the gross, but we're increasing the density in the pods, but from an overall aggregate density of the whole property, we're not going above what would be reasonable with the flume as R1.
Cause R1 would be quarter acres, and it's 166, yeah, I was trying to get my calculator up.
So with our density of 556 over the 166, I calculated at 3.34 units per acre, and 10,000 square feet out of 1 acre's 560 square feet, so it's roughly 4 units an acre for the flume. So that's what we're saying is hey, instead of just painting with a broad brush and doing R1 for the whole property, we're just going to concentrate it in some areas, go less dense in other areas, but on the whole we're not going to exceed the density that the flume already sets forth. The contrast to that would be saying, hey, the flume at 40 units an acre would get us X, but we want to put high density in, so we want to go above that to Y.
Did you subtract out the space for roads? Cause if you're just doing the math with 4 acres on 166 acres.
Yeah, so on the table, that's where our gross density is the 722. If you can just scroll down a little bit, Callie. So that's just a straight gross acreage calc. Now keep in mind, if you do 10,000 square feet,
The 720 is gross?
720 is gross. But if you do a 10,000 square foot lot, an acre is 43,560. So there's 3,560 square feet that are already kind of baked in as surplus at 4 units an acre. And then generally you would see anywhere from 20 to 30%. And so that's kind of how we backed ourselves into this 556. And I think Larry has done some of those calculations, and we were in the ballpark of saying, hey, if we assume a 20% loss of roads with 10,000 square feet, that's kind of how we get to this 556 number.
I did double check I did a bunch of calcs, and they're right in the same ballpark, I mean, within just a few units, really.
And so that was the point of bringing that up, is saying that we are diverging from the flume as far as creating different pod zoning densities, but on the aggregate for the whole property, we're not exceeding what you would expect from the flume if we just came in and zoned the whole thing R1.
So, that's a reasonable argument, I mean, a discussion. The other side of that is, if you look at the flume and you take it literally, and you look and you go, wow, there's this R3 piece in here, that R3 piece is higher density. And if it, you know, if it is, it is. If it isn't, it isn't. So we have that decision it's something to be thinking about as we work through this. The other item I noticed, and I'm still on my second note, is in the, can you scroll up now a little bit, Callie? Just the other way, the other up for me. There you go, thank you. So down in that, at the bottom of your screen where it says possible city master plan water tank site, if you look at that closely, you can see through that blue that there's quite a bit of trees and things there beneath that, in that color. Well, from the corner of that square at the left, where it cuts in there, about an inch and a quarter up from the bottom, on the left side of that blue, there's a line in the flume that starts there and diagonally cuts up and sort of follows that tree line a bit. That is designated open space in the flume. And just a quick, on the county's not necessarily accurate depiction of that and their measuring tool, that's probably somewhere between 8 and 9 acres as open space. And currently, we show that it's proposed to be designated as R1.
1/2 acre.
R1 with the blue being the larger lots, that would be the half.
Larger lots and so on.
Yeah.
The real issue there is will we stick with the flume for open space, or do we do something different? I'm not sure I haven't walked that, I don't know how steep that is. Is it buildable?
I mean, anything's buildable for a price.
Well,
But
well, maybe.
but I don't know that it's worth the price to build on some of that stuff. I've pulled USGS contours on it. We haven't flown it with our drone yet to get topography, but I would anticipate, based on what I've seen with USGS, especially towards the south end where we have that water tank, that it's not going to be, that you're going to be in pretty steep slopes, exceeding what you would typically see people build on here.
Okay. So the other comment that I have on note 2, if you can scroll us back to where we can read that one, Cal. Thank you. The higher densities proposed in our R2 and pod number 4 and R3 and pod number 5. And just working through this, so these densities permit multifamily dwellings that are generally viewed as more affordable and support the national view that there's a national need for affordable housing. These densities also really directly support the goals in the Parowan General Plan under housing. And so that is in, let's see if I can find that. I don't know that we need to go there, but it's in the General Plan Chapter 5, which is housing. Would you like to look at that? Anybody? Sure. Yes? Sure. Yeah. Callie? can you bring up the general plan? Yeah. In 2020, whoops, no. Now I'm lost. Yeah, there it is. Okay, thank you. And over on the left. So page 32-ish. I have vertigo.
Nice, like you knew exactly where it was.
Okay, I would, there's some facts and things in here that also support this, but I would scroll down a bit further to goals and strategies, I think. There we go. So goals and strategies, goal 1. Can people in the back read that? No? Okay, I'll cut through these. So these are in our general plan, which is a guide. These have been adopted by the city council back in 2021. And we all agreed that we'd be working towards some of these. So goal 1, encourage affordable housing. Affordable housing must be matched to the average income of residents. Strategy 1 is incentivize a variety of affordable housing options to ensure all families, individuals, and couples have an equal opportunity. Number 2, encourage infill development within the downtown core per Utah code such and such. And goal 2 is support the development of a variety of housing opportunities. Number 1, support the development of single-family dwellings, multifamily dwellings, and retirement housing dispersed throughout the city. Number 2, study the feasibility of providing opportunities for accessory dwellings and wow, we did that one. Cool. I'm going to skip on. So goal 3, quality housing. Parowan should approve development proposals that meet the current zoning requirements and the high expectations of residents. 2, support housing developments that are constructed out of high-quality materials and are intended for owner occupancy, even in the case of multifamily developments. Number 2, all new residential developments through appropriate subdivision design development standards and the provision of required amenities and facilities, as well as be compatible with neighboring development and planned urban developments. And is there more than 4? No? Okay. Let's go back to that. Encourage a variety of housing and residential opportunities by establishing and providing a range of allowed residential densities and lot sizes. So, any questions about that? Okay, I'm going to move on. If we can go back to that map now, I think we'll be able to stay out of the general plan for a bit. So note 3, let me see here. So really note 3 addresses density, and I think Dallas explained that already. 720 lots isn't attainable because it didn't account for roads. And it would only be attainable with an R1 or an R1A designation. And just for information, so the collector roads that are shown, the dotted lines that are shown on that map within that development, by my calculation, those account for about 55 quarter-acre lots. And that's only about 8% of the entire subdivision acreage. So if you extend that out, you take 55 lots and you go, you wanna get to, I think your estimate, to 20% with interior roads and so on, we end up with something like, potentially 583 gross lots, 'cause 20% accounts for about 137 quarter-acre lots, just in the ballpark, kind of a thing. And that's just my guess. Your estimate was between 20 and 30%, so depending on how things worked out.
Yeah, and our goal in putting the 556 number on there is that is our top line not to exceed. It's very possible that depending on road configurations, layouts, market demand, if half-acre lots are hotter than quarter acres or vice versa, that we may not get anywhere near 556, but we're putting 556 in as the cap, which in my opinion is a reasonable assumption based on if this thing was fully developed as R1 across there as an equivalent to then try to distribute into these different housing types.
Cool, thank you.
I have a question with the design. I guess I was thinking about emergency services and access. I'm just curious why there's not a road between, for example, pod 2 and pod 4. Also pod 5 and pod 6, 'cause I'm not sure how, if they're backing up against each other. I mean, I know that's a conceptual
Yeah, it's a good question. So the way that the pods are laid out, they're still big parcels. So there would be intermediate roads in between all of these. The roads that are shown on here are based on the city's newly adopted transportation master plan. So we're saying this is how we look at that transportation master plan and think it's going to translate to this, and then we have to do the infill in between. And so, but where Larry was going with coming up with acreages, one of the things that I'm unaware of at this point is we show that master planned road over on the west side that goes through the purple, through the red, through the green north. Part of that's shown on the county, part of it's shown on us. Is it really a 50-50 split? Is it all on us? Is it all on the county? Is it 2/3? And so this is just us trying to adapt that transportation plan to show it for planning commission and council and say, based on your transportation plan, this is where we likely see the roads coming through here as the big picture. And then depending on, hey, we don't want to have a lot of north-south. We don't want a bunch of south-facing lots, so we want to run the roads a different way. So we'll do all the infill. And then the city has design standards that account for turning radiuses on fire trucks and blah, blah, blah. So when we come through and do the infill, that's where we go more towards engineering design standards, and that kind of stuff's already baked in.
But I think you answered that question, but so the infill roads are not drawn on here.
Right.
You're with that,
Right.
okay.
And they've been taken into account as far as the acreage goes then?
Well, only by what I just
Density?
mentioned, by percentage, 'cause we don't know there's no depiction, we don't know what they'll be.
And the challenge on our end to put roads in there like that is that we're not even set on zoning yet. So depending on, we had this last meeting last time, and now we've proposed a new zoning configuration, but depending on what the zone is, changes the lot sizes, which changes the roads and the orientation. And so before we want to start spinning our wheels on what a subdivision layout could look like, we need to know what we're designing towards in a rough sense. And that's why we're here trying to get this recommendation and then go to council, is to say, is R3 reasonable to assume for some portion, and is the R2 reasonable to assume over here, and the R1 and the half acre and all that?
Right. Another point that's been discussed is, so while all these pods are dimensioned now, and we would look at those and say that's something, the real intent here is that as it develops, if pick the number 3 pod. If something were to happen and that road might shift over and not go through that pod and go somewhere else, they might add a few more lots in there, or the other way, in pod 4. So it's a little bit of a moving target, but we're gonna not us, but the city council or the city will define what small adjustments are and so on, so it won't be any big thing.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
If I have the cart in front of the horse, let me know. If we have a maximum of 556, and let's say that's in the agreement for the 166 acres, with us having different zones, if we hit that 556 and there's still areas not developed, what then happens to that land? Does it just become a weed patch? Does it become...
No, so,
Because we could technically, on 166 acres, build more than that number that you're giving us, right?
so, in theory, you could. I mean, what we're proposing is, in my opinion, a reasonable distribution of these, but you could, I think kind of where you're going is you're saying, hey, if we had 66 acres and we just wanted to slam as many townhomes in as we could in one corner, you could end up with 100 acres of nothing.
Right.
But generally the way that I've seen development agreements and annexation agreements work is that we agree to this top line, we agree to some kind of configuration that looks like this. A developer then goes through and works through the process, and then that annexation agreement gets recorded at the county and goes against, and
Runs with the property.
runs with the property. And so to make changes to density brings it back to city council to then, so in the scenario you're talking about, 10 years down the road, we get down and we have 20 acres left and we've already exhausted our 556, then we have to go back before council and say, hey council, we have this, and so it becomes amendments to the previously agreed on, which I don't think generally happens where they say, yeah, we gave you something and we're gonna continue to give and give, and so, but I think that's kind of where you were brainstorming that.
Yeah, I'm envisioning empty, vacant lots in between, scattered throughout.
Could I weigh in, because I've been thinking about how this could be constructed in a development agreement? I think it could be avoided by structuring it in a text format in a development agreement so that it could be recorded against the different parcels. In such a way that we say, okay, within the purple area, you have so many acres. Within that area, you're gonna need to stick to so many units per acre.
And that's what, we have that on the table.
Right, so that would prevent this from even being a thing.
Mm.
Yeah, and that's where I was kind of going with it too, is that, for instance, the purple with the R3, you're only allowed to have 9 units an acre. We have it shown as a density of 8.5, so we're slightly under that. But that's what we're saying, hey, we're planning on putting 8.5 in purple and whatever, 1.8 in blue, and so we're trying to show that, and I picture this map being an exhibit in either the development or the annexation agreement, and so that's where we have that delineated as far as this is the density we look to see in each one of these pods. But, and having said that, if this map gets adopted or some version of this with it, then the developer would not be able to overrun the densities that are shown on that table without amending the agreement. And so you can't get to a scenario where someone comes in and says, hey, I know pod 5 was this density, but we're actually gonna 1x, 1.5x that kind of thing, so.
That was my question.
Any others? So I'm really down to, we covered pretty much note 5 and 4. So note 6 is potentially one of those things that I look at as a potential code exception. We've already discussed what's in the flume or not in the flume. And, so depending on whether we look at it as a gross acreage density or we look at it as if R3 is considered high density by itself, sort of a thing, would come into consideration. Pod 7, Dallas probably already knows this, Hillside Development Code is likely going to apply to those. I think you're probably the one that pointed that out, I think, initially. So which means the density is limited by the slope of the land there. We've already mentioned that there's 8.5 acres at the southern tip of the place that's reserved for open space in the flume.
Has that been taken into account in this conceptual drawing?
Well, no, not really. Yeah, I mean, it's in the drawing, it's there, but in the gross acreage and the calculations, it's just considered like it's like flat on as it is on the screen. And really, so in that area, if you take out 9 acres and you say that's open space, can't build anything here, then the density has to go up somewhere in these other spots.
And in an event like that, I think that to the same question you asked previously, I think that if we get to the end and we have more density available, then that would be something where the developer would then have to approach the council and say, hey, we were approved for this. And then that's something that's completely in the council's hands as far as whether they're willing to amend it or not. But that's where when we propose this, we're trying to live by this, and that any change to this is something that goes back to council for adoption or not.
So note number 9 talks about the master plan improvements discussed to date have been limited to master plans road, possible water tank location, and the other item I think is a sewage lift station or something to do with sewage somewhere, right?
Yeah, so that's part of our master plan. That's not included on the city's master plan.
Oh, okay.
So the only thing that's shown on here is the master plan roads and then the water. We will have our own master plan that will incorporate a sewer lift station.
Thank you. The other place where we need to think about in our recommendation would be pod number 3. So if we read, not sure which, so that is note number 12, and it says, Pod 3 is a 6.5 acre area set aside for either commercial or school site, if desired, through discussion with the city. If this type of use is not desired, it could be converted to additional residential area, zone R1, without increasing the maximum proposed residential density of 566. So the comments that I would have on that is the city's going to work through that, the council, I presume, the city manager and the mayor, but we're going to have to talk about what a recommendation for zoning that parcel. I mean, it could you know, conceivably fall under commercial as C1, or it could be residential, R1. And it just depends on the vision for that property, but we have to put it in some zone somewhere.
Yeah, or I think is Civic a zone?
No.
We don't have a civic zone.
Civic is a designation on our master plan,
Okay,
but it is not a zone.
gotcha.
So when we zone something for our own use, it would technically be a civic use, but we also put it within one of the other zones.
Okay.
It's kinda weird. I think we should have a
Probably
civic zone
the
personally, but.
most-
We should, don't we?
And I think that the intent of that note is just to say that, and I don't know that we need to have some agreement as far as what's going in there and how big it is. This is just kind of earmarking that 6.5 acres to say, hey, if there's a desire from the school or the city or somebody, this would be a area that's allocated for that. And in the event that no one wants to pick that up in 3, 5, 10 years, then we just move forward with it as R1, but we don't, because we show zero density on this for that pod. If that doesn't get developed as, or there's not a need for it, then we still just abide by the 556, and so we just have to further lower the density of the R1 pods.
Right.
I would hope if there's a timeline established with that, it would be more than 3 to 5 years. Just saying, out loud.
Thank you.
'Cause,
Not gonna,
Yeah,
not
yeah,
out-
no, that's it, I'm
Yeah.
not,
And I was more so just
Mm.
saying that some timeline, so
yeah.
the way I envision this going is that we have this map with it shown on here, it's earmarked for that, whether it's 3 years, 5 years, 20 years.
mhm.
But if nothing ever happens with it and there's never serious interest from either the city or a school or wherever, I think initially Alex, when he first purchased it, he had talked to the school, and I don't think they have another elementary site, and this is roughly the same size as like East Elementary in Cedar, and so that seemed to be kind of a reasonable size. But if nothing ever happened with it, we don't want, that's an area where we don't wanna have to come back to council in 20 years and say, hey, we did this as commercial, there's no interest, can we now zone it? We're just trying to say, if there's no interest in the future, then it just reverts to R1, and then we just use the same density, or the same number of units distributed over that parcel as well.
I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say, I think that there's some opinions on the city council. I doubt we get through this development agreement without some sort of designation of that. But I don't wanna bring what I have heard one-on-one, some of their opinions into this, because this is a chance for this planning commission to make its recommendation. But I think it would be, I think it does need to be, whether it's tonight, hopefully, that's just me being optimistic, with a recommendation. There should be some sort of a recommendation by this body, but I know that the city council, different city council has some opinions about that, whether we incorporate it as part of a park, or whether we do something with density or zoning as far as residential or whatever, so. I'm just saying, I don't really think that's gonna remain as a big mystery by the end of this whole thing.
Right, well, and that's not my concern, it's just, I'm interested in getting as complete as possible as a recommendation, and to not provide one for one of the pods seems, unreasonable. And so, we could recommend it be one or another, and move forward with something like that, if we can agree on that.
Yes, I would say, I guess in the absence of a civic zone or something, then we would have it, we would propose it as commercial with feedback. Because it sounds like commercial would be the most appropriate for school, civic, public work building, whatever. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, just for reference, so pod 3 would represent like roughly 20 lots in R1. Probably less roads and so on, but. So we've touched on this, I'll just go through my note, real quick. Not our business here, but we'll make a recommendation probably to city council, or just that it's heard here is cool. The methodology of how density is gonna be tracked by the city and the developer should be included in the agreement. And that's because the requested density is not based on existing code. And over the estimated build-out period, the city administrators will change probably a number of times. So density will need to be tracked based on the development agreement and not a review of the density allowed by our existing code. So it's just a comment for, you know, what it's worth. And then another comment for just heads up, the developer's proposing twin homes in Pod 4. Parowan currently has no code for twin homes. We have code for duplexes, which puts us pretty much in the same space regarding density. But if the true intent is twin homes, then we should.
Yeah, and I sometimes use those interchangeably even though they're not, but the intent is to meet whatever. Our intent proposing this is just to request whatever's allowed within the current zoning, and then as zones change over time, we would go along for the ride, but that's just, I can just change that to say reflect duplexes, if that's what's in the, in the current code.
Then my last concern that indirectly relates to density is, the active transportation plan depicts a multi-use plan along the east edge of the annexation. From the north at 200 North to the south at City View Drive. So if you pick that up on this map, it's down here at, so 200 North. So just below, on your screens, just below the pod number 3, running down towards the bottom of your screen all the way through to just about the, well, City View Drive, basically, is where that is depicted and would stop. And then a question I had also regarding density, and this probably Dan maybe can answer this. So on the active transportation plan, are these paths in the existing road easements? In other words, there's not yet another easement to add an active transportation plan.
Yeah, so the transportation master plan that was just adopted has typical sections, is what they call it. And the typical sections show on a specific type of road, it shows the cross-section of what that road looks like with or without the, an active transportation trail.
Okay.
And it's contemplated to be within the existing right-of-way. There will be some, of course, that it's just a trail that
Right.
isn't attached to a road, and that's kind of the exception to the rule.
And just to add to what Dan was saying is that generally when there's master plans, whether it's noted on here or not, when you go forward to develop, the city says, hey, this is on our master plan, you gotta put this on. So we could certainly add a note that says there's an active trail master plan along 200 North or wherever it is, but in reality, whether that's on here or not, when we come in and develop, the city's gonna say, master plan says you gotta have active transportation, add it to your plan.
Yeah, it's just a heads-up density thing. I was curious more than anything.
As far as whether that was above and beyond the right-of-way width, is that where you were?
Yes, exactly. And, questions?
Nope. I like this new zoning map. I appreciate you putting zones, 5 and 4, away from any other residential pre-existing housing as their property, especially 4 where it's totally surrounded by all your new improvement, and 5 it's up against county. Hopefully that will make current residents happier. So.
seems to
not a
me,
touchscreen.
it seems to me that it's meeting the density,
Pardon me?
it's meeting the density and zoning requirements as it's set up.
Well, it certainly meets the density requirement on the gross scale. The decision you have to ask yourself is, is that the decision block you're in? Or is the decision block a block that says R3 doesn't belong in a low density area, no matter where it goes? So if you look at the whole thing and go, yeah, you know, that's the density, then we're good. If you don't believe that, then we're not so good.
How old is the flume?
Pardon?
How old is the flume?
Very old.
Yeah.
And so it would not incorporate the general plan of showing different distributions of housing and all of that,
Yeah, not really.
right? I mean, it
Yeah.
just paints with a
Yeah.
broad brush and says
Oh, yeah.
R1.
From, yes,
Yeah.
a very long time ago.
Yeah.
Like I say, it doesn't incorporate any of the goals in the general plan, even
Yeah.
though it's a piece of it, kind of a thing. It's just, it's stuck in time, so to speak. Well, and I heard you sort of lean towards the pod 3 being a commercial zone?
I think so. I have it noted up on the top also where I have the twin homes, but I have the future civic / commercial site zoned commercial up on the very top right. So in my mind, I was thinking we were proposing that as commercial. The yellow where I have twin home instead of duplex is a typo that I should change to reflect what's allowed in the zone, but I can have that to Cali tomorrow morning by 8:30, so, to get that revised. But yeah, I think that we're proposing the red as commercial in the absence of some kind of civic or other type of zone.
So we'd need to change the notes on number 12, correct? 'Cause doesn't it say that it would be converted to R1?
No,
I just have that on there as converted to R1 if there's no use. It sounds like Dan maybe has some inside information that there's some, not inside information, but that
I feel
there's
like
some
that's-
intent
Yeah.
to earmark that.
All I'm
for
saying is I doubt it'll be some big question mark that will go into it, get through the entire development agreement without having it decided.
Well, yes, and the other point here is, this would be whatever we do when we come up with a recommendation, it's a recommendation to city council. If they deliberate over this and they look at, pod 3 and they go, there's no way in heck we want that to be commercial, they just change it. They only have to have, the recommendation, so it's not cast in concrete when it goes to city council.
And so that note on number 12 is just to say that if for whatever reason pod 3 goes away, then it's just assumed that it's R1 with no additional, and by generating that additional area, we're not trying to get additional units, we're just saying, hey, we're approved for 556. If the red goes away, then we'll just have some bigger lots to try to achieve that 556. We're not gonna say, hey, because we gained 6 more acres of R1, we want 20 more units. We'll just do it as we'll just incorporate it into the development.
I'm sorry, my mind was wandering as you went through that. So, you're saying we zone it C1.
Yep.
And let's just say the concept falls apart. You would come back and just ask for a modification to the development agreement.
I think so. That's the way I would see it. I would see if this map gets adopted and it says, hey, pod 3 is C1, 15 years down the road, nothing ever happens with it. The developer comes back and says, hey, when this was approved as C1, it's been 15 years, nothing's happened, look at note 12, can we develop it as R1 now?
Okay, thank you.
I think that would just be taken care of in city council in the annex agreement. I don't think we need to focus so much on that.
That wouldn't be part of our motion, you're right, that would be in the development agreement. It's just so we know that the option is there.
Sorry, I have to work through this.
Okay.
So, just listening back to the maximum being 556, and if you hit that 556 and there's 20 acres that hasn't been developed, whether that's together, 20 acres, or 20 acres dispersed throughout the entire property, you would then come back potentially and ask city council to adjust your annexation, which they could say yea or nay to. They say nay because you hit your maximum number. What does that do to the overall project and the feel for the people who have moved in there? Does that make sense?
So they couldn't say nay to the annexation because they're already getting annexed in.
Yeah,
Coming back and modifying the agreement.
So that's something that the council just have to weigh at that time and say, hey, has this been a good project, has it been a bad project? Is it something that we're willing to give more density to, or are we not? But that's something that's evaluated at whatever future date. What we're saying by providing the table down on the bottom is we're saying that, hey, in this pod, we're not gonna exceed this density. Very likely we'll be under those densities somewhat. And so we're showing that we're gonna try to achieve this distribution with this number of units. But I would say what you're speculating on is something that's probably very, very unlikely that we would get to the end of it and have exhausted everything, because we're not gonna be able to exhaust the density without exceeding what's already on here. And so I look at this table and that 556 number as something that the city has. A lot of times in other cities they call these like development overlays, but you basically go in with this exhibit and then we come in with phase one and you go, okay, phase one, 40 lots, done with that one. Okay, phase two, 85 lots, done with that one. Phase three. And so you just start striking those, and so there's no way to exceed what is allowed. And then we come in with an R3 project and we propose something that's 9.8 units an acre, and then it goes through development review and the city says, nope, you can't exceed 8.5, that's what's in your development agreement, and our ordinance says 9.0. So you've gotta reduce those amount of lots.
Right, so just to be clear, that development agreement, once it's executed, it pretty much overrides the city code.
Yeah.
So anything in the development agreement that might conflict with city code is legal and binding, unless all parties, sit down at a table and agree to
Well, I
revise
think a
it.
good example is Stillwater and Maple Springs. It's a subdivision, it was approved. You have lots of lots that aren't built upon right now. It's been 20 years, but they're not increasing their density just because they're not built upon, and they're not changing it. Those lots are already sold, they're already dedicated for it.
Right. Any other questions, comments?
If we, make a recommendation either way this evening, is that something that is just general, we recommend it as it is, or are we needing to make comments, changes like saying in specifically like note 12, either it says either commercial. I didn't read the first, okay, never mind, sorry. It's in there as commercial or school, okay, so never mind.
Well, it says zone R1, we would wanna, but let me try and so, we've talked about these things, and our concern again tonight is the overall density. Now we've read the notes and we understand what can happen and where things can be. It's now up to the city and the council to work through a development agreement. But a development agreement, if we heard in the training tonight, is gonna flow through the system the same way a new piece of code does. It's gonna come to planning and zoning for a review or a recommendation, and then it's gonna go back, and then a public hearing. Then it's gonna go back to city council, and then it becomes a legislative thing and they vote on it. So, we don't have to worry about necessarily the language in here.
Okay.
We need to make a a motion regarding the density. And do we agree with it? We disagree with it? And my preference that we do this, if we're gonna get into the motion, mode, I would prefer to see one motion for the density and a second motion regarding the zoning, because I think in the motion regarding the zoning, there'll be some little clause that talks about pod 3 should be commercial. And any other thing that whoever's making the motion wants to put in there. And then the city council will take it from there.
Alrighty, I make a motion that we give a positive recommendation to city council for the zoning recommendations that AJM provided to us, with the exception of zone 3 being changed to commercial.
Do I have a second?
I second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any nays? Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. I would, at this point, entertain a motion regarding the overall density, or I should say, the density of the pods, or the, yeah, think through that.
Ugh, I would have no clue how to word that.
I can try.
I was like,
I make a motion that we give a positive recommendation to city council for the proposed, density as stated for pods 1 through 7.
With the exception of pod 3, because it doesn't have a, well, oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's proposed at 0, okay,
Mhm.
you're right. Can you say that again? I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. 7 totaling, you can add at the end, totaling 556 dwellings,
Let's make
or
that-
units,
Yeah.
maybe units.
Yeah, let's make that on proposal 2, so we know that's the one we're working off of.
Oh, yeah.
Is that what you're calling this one, proposal 2?
Yeah, we'll call this one proposal 2.
Okay.
Yeah, this one's dated 10/3/24.
10/3/24.
I would just like to be able to make the edit to the legend in the top right to just reflect duplex instead of twin.
Actually, we're not making any recommendation regarding the notes
Okay.
on the document.
Alright.
Yeah.
We are looking at the table at the bottom.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
looking at densities.
So do I need to do that again?
Would,
Callie?
yeah, would you please? Oh, no? Okay. Can you read it back?
Can you
to us?
read it back then? Sorry.
I'm always telling people to talk in their microphones. Okay, Heather, move to give a positive recommendation to the council for proposed density as stated for pods 1 through 7, totaling 556 residencies as presented on proposal 2, dated 10/3/2024.
Do I have a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it. Thank you very much. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, thank you. Good evening.
Okay. Moving right along, we're into reports.
Keith's not here.
Oh.
I do have an item, but Keith is not here today.
Okay, maybe next meeting? So he was doing a monthly, and he's
Yeah.
once a month?
Yeah, he'll do that.
Okay. So if you have any agenda and forward-looking notes, add that one, in case I forget. Yeah. Okay, I'll take care of it. Okay, Dan, anything else?
Yes, so I have talked to several members of the city council over the past couple of months. I teased this idea when we were meeting as a work meeting. It wasn't the appropriate time, and we didn't want to go down a rabbit hole since we had a limited amount of time with the ombudsman's office. But several of the city council have wondered and have asked if we could revisit the storage container code, not get rid of it, but to make some small modifications to it. And I do often get applications for storage container things, and I bring out the code as it is and say that is what it is. Recently got another application from Mr. Bernhardy, who's in the back. We normally do not make modifications to code because somebody just makes a request, but I did tell him that many of the city council have said that they did want to take a second look at it and maybe make some modifications. So in discussing this with Larry, Larry had said that it would probably be a good idea if we actually had the city council discuss it as an item and make a actual request as to what they're thinking about, rather than just randomly throw it at planning commission and say, give us a recommendation. Maybe they could actually have a discussion and say, okay, maybe we would like to see it modified in this area, in this area, in this area. And we could put that on the next city council agenda, which is next week, to have a discussion and kick it to planning commission to actually then discuss it, suss out those ideas in those areas that the city council would like to consider. This is land use code, which means a recommendation does have to come from planning commission with a public hearing. It would then go back to planning, or back to city council for any modification to the land use code that wanted to be done. So to be clear, this is not, and Rob is like, what do I do? Do I submit an application? And I'm like, well, if you submit an application, you just have to be denied, because what they want to do in doing some modification to the church for their food program and stuff, we've already fully discussed it with planning commission. You can't incorporate a storage container in the construction of a building that would violate the storage container code. And I said, so have a little bit of patience, because several of the city council said they wanted us to reconsider it a little bit. So, Rob's not here tonight to make a presentation. I just do want you to know that as we talk about it, I'm sure he'll have maybe some comments as the planning commission looks at it as a test case. We have considered a lot of them. I do often get applications for people to move a container on their property. I get applications to, can I move it from one parcel to another parcel? We get applications to have a full-sized 40-footer instead of a 20-footer, or to have containers on a temporary basis. In other words, some reasonable modifications to what we have. And what I have to tell them is the code is pretty black and white. I have to just deny them, and that's fine. I can deny them. But when the city council is saying we would like to maybe relook at this, we don't want to open the storage wars, but we do want to maybe look at making some adjustments. So,
You have no idea.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'm shocked, because when we brought this up before,
right.
it was completely shut down by city council, don't waste your time.
Well, and that was a different city council
I know,
with
I'm
different
just
members. So,
in shock.
Can I ask, just because I wasn't here, but I could hear the chatter from
yeah,
Cedar City.
yeah.
Wasn't this a war? Didn't
Oh, yeah.
it divide
So
the community?
it happened during an election time. There were more yard signs about storage war, yes or no,
Yeah,
than there were about the election that year. So I don't think the city council wants to rehash that. But there is some discussion about maybe modifying it a little bit. But, again, I don't want to try to put any specific, we'll let the city council say what maybe they want to look at again.
okay.
But I just wanted to bring it up.
I was curious, 'cause I remember it being, is it divisive or divisive? Both?
Depends on who you're talking to.
It was divisive.
Around here, you could say divisive.
Well, any time, really, on any code, it's always nice to get a little guidance, especially from city council. We don't necessarily expect that the city council says, change these words from this to that. They can do that after we mess around with it. But it would be nice to hear that we think this is overly restrictive, or that might be overly restrictive, and are there other options in this area? And then we can certainly kick it around, and then, of course, then comes the public feedback and so on. And so, yeah, I'm sure we're up to the task. We'll all have to change addresses and stuff.
Yeah.
You know.
I am optimistic that we can have a good, respectful, healthy discussion.
Yeah, I think so too.
We can discuss, yeah. It's just when you open the doors.
Yeah. Okay, anything else, Dan?
No, that's, well, no, I do want to report we had a training that I mentioned that I was going to be, subscribing to it, that the Land Use Institute put on. I was hoping to be there in person. Things being what they are, around here, I was able to only go on Zoom. The governor, gave a speech, to our earlier conversation with the ombudsman. From that training, from things that were said in that meeting by the land use task force, I really do expect a lot of potential modifications to land use code. You can look at it optimistically relative to California, as the ombudsman did, or you can look at it from my perspective, just what we are. I think that there's going to be a lot of things coming down the pipe, a lot of ideas being thrown around. The league will be definitely very involved in negotiating on things that are really bad for cities and trying to help, but anything that's interesting, I'll definitely forward. But I think that when the legislative session kicks off early next year, it's going to be an interesting one that's all going to end up playing out across this commission. So.
And you're in the room and or the league, and I can talk to Brandy Grace. We have a meeting with UAC next week. Eyes on the
Yeah,
ball.
we'll keep a close eye on it.
They need to know Parowan isn't Provo and
Yeah.
Paiute isn't West Valley, you know.
Scott,
city.
this is out of scope, buddy.
He said you're out of scope.
I'm just following up on the question.
Oh.
No, hey,
That's all I have.
So Dan, please describe the makeup of the storage containers, and are they located anywhere near
I'm out.
Charlie P. Pratt flag?
I got to drive to Salt Lake tonight, so I'm not going to extend this any
I
longer.
didn't finish college, so I don't know all that stuff, but thank you. That's why you're here. Weston, comments?
Nope, we're good.
Okay.
I got nothing.
That's it.
Dave, any comments?
Not now.
Okay. All right.
I make a motion that we adjourn. So, did you have anything to
No,
report, Larry?
I'm
I'm
good.
sorry.
I second it.
I'm good. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any nays?
Sorry about
Thank you
that.
all.
I just jumped the gun.
Jamie, thanks. Tracy, thank you. Thanks.
me, I will be in absolute panic. Cause I'm thinking if somebody stumbled upon it, they might just
Well, I talked to Clyde,